Hello and welcome to the Coaching Podcast, coaching for success in sport and business. Your host is Emma Doyle, the energy and high performance under pressure coach who is a world leader in unleashing human potential. Buckle up for this high octane session. Let them have it, coach.
G'day everybody and welcome to the Coaching Podcast. I'm here with Sean Brawley today, who's dedicated 25 years to helping people from all walks of life unlock their potential and elevate their performance. Two things that I love to talk about on the show. And the other reason I think that Sean is going to be a fantastic guest, I'm already putting it out there in the future, is because of his expertise in accelerated learning, innovative coaching, and sustainable high performance in sport and business, which of course is our tagline on the show. He's worked with all sorts of corporate companies, been a former top 150 world-ranked professional tennis player, and worked with Pete Carroll. I love conceptualizing win forever. That's going to be my opening question for sure. And of course, last but not least, I talk about the inner game of tennis all the time in my presentations. Look at Scott, I've got all sorts of notes hanging out of the book because of Sir John Whitmore working with Timothy Gallwey to define the inner game of tennis. So I can't wait to talk to you about the 50th anniversary of that book. There's lots of 50s happening for me this year. That's all I'm going to say on the show. But without further ado, Sean, I'm going to welcome you to the show and I'm going to ask you my first pattern break question: Star Wars or Star Trek? What's your take? Welcome to the show.
I like both of them. So if I had to choose one, I would have to say Star Wars.
Star Wars.
And the reason would be because of what I know that Joseph Campbell, who is somebody that I've followed for many, many years and has been very influential in my life, he was behind the Star Wars scripts and storylines. And George Lucas said on on a number of different interviews that he doesn't think Star Wars would have happened without Joseph Campbell and the hero's journey motif, which this Star Wars followed pretty closely.
Well, everybody, straight away, if you do not know the hero's journey, I read a presentation for Publicist, a virtual presentation. They were going through massive change. So I did it on the Change Odyssey based on the hero's journey. It's got so many valuable coaching reflection questions when you unpack it. We've gone there already, which is super awesome. So I'm going to go to win forever. I want you to take me through the story of working with Pete Carroll, who served as the USC football head coach. But win forever. Great tagline, but is it possible? Is it possible? Well, tell me about win forever.
Yeah, so it is possible, and I'm not going to go there right away, but hopefully you can remind me it depends on what you mean by win. And the inner game has a whole chapter on the meaning of competition where, win what? But I think that I would like to start with one of the most important things, one of the most helpful things after a number of years in business after the tour, I got back into tennis as a coach, and I called my old coach from USC, Dick Leach, and said, "Okay, this is my first day back in tennis. What do you think is important?" And he said, "Without any doubt, you have to have a coaching philosophy. It doesn't even matter what the philosophy is per se, but you have to have one, and you have to be able to clearly explain it to the people you're working with, and that philosophy will have the focus and your why, and you can see whether you're being effective with that coaching philosophy. It's like a train track." And if anybody doesn't know Dick Leach, he was the father of Ricky Leach, who won a number of Grand Slam doubles championships, and his son John was a four-time All-American at USC and is now married to Lindsay Davenport. So Dick, that was one of the most helpful things. And why do I start with that? Because 20 years later, literally almost exactly, I'm back. I got referred to Pete Carroll before he got the job at SC. And he basically had called me and said, I need some help. I think the inner game is the foundation of my coaching philosophy, but I don't really know how. And I've gotten fired. He got fired from the New York Jets and then the New England Patriots. And he said, I know for sure that I have maybe one more chance and to be a head coach. He was by far the top NFL defensive coordinator, so he could always do that. And he said, but I don't know why I got fired. So we basically spent 9 months, and I told him, I said, well, you have to be crystal clear about what your philosophy is. We literally spent 9 months, and he was writing paper. I still have the pages from what he typed out. And so I just find that I just kind of like that, the fact that a USC, my one of my mentors from USC, 20 years later, I'm passing on that information, which became like when he got the interview for USC, he was so crystal clear about his philosophy. He basically said, here's what my philosophy is. Here's how long it's going to take for me to get on top. Here's what I need from you. And if you can't give me what I need from you, then I'm not going to take the job. Mm. And, he had a little bit of a rough start, but he started, I think, 1-4, but then won the last games. And then from that point on, they won like 2 national championships in a row and played in the national championship for a third possible time for a three-peat. And so that, and so Win Forever is the name he gave his philosophy. Mm. And what Pete gave to me, which I believe I've contributed to Inner Game, although not in any kind of book form yet. But if you read the Inner Game of tennis, if you know what to look for, it's still, even though the tools are there to not participate in the fix-it culture that we live in a fix-it culture. It's called the medical model. Something's broken about me and I have to fix it. You were talking in your last podcast about strengths and weaknesses or areas for development. And it's like, we've just got this whole culture of seeing, looking for what somebody's doing wrong and giving instructions to fix those technical or behavioral flaws. And so Tim has the seeds for getting out of that. But if you actually look at the book, it's still within the medical model. He's still trying to help people fix stuff that, and so what Pete, the part of the Win Forever philosophy, which I found really helpful, is putting everything in a whole development philosophy. And so Win Forever is basically summing up for him would be being crystal clear about your coaching philosophy and understanding that this sounds really bizarre in a way, but he literally advocates, do not try your best. Because if you try hard to perform at your very best, you're going to tighten and not play your best. So it was the first thing I realized about. So that's when I started to think about Inner Game in a development program versus I could help anybody with their tennis and their golf, but it kind of was still, they were still part of this whole fix-it thing. And so the Win Forever is basically not that you're going to win the Super Bowl forever or the college national championships forever. It's that you have such a high excellence in your program that you give yourselves opportunity to win the big event. But he said there's so many different things that can get in the way that are out of your control. But in general, where he applied the inner game to the football, the main one was what I had kind of just alluded. Like if you heard his talks, he's the most competitive guy I've ever met on the planet Earth. And yet what he's telling his players is UCLA is not your rival. This is not a big game. Get that completely out of your system. This is not a big game. Every other team, we used to think that UCLA was our big rival and we're getting all pumped up, and it's the same thing. We got pumped up too much sometimes. And so his basic thing, which is going to lead later, if you end up asking one of the two questions that you said you were going to ask about, what's the one thing that I think can be disruptive for coaching?
Go there now. Go for it.
Well, so the part of the inner game that Pete got was like this part. And what he'd also say is trust your training. Don't try to play your best. Play normal. Now, think about this. Most competitive guy on the planet. When have you ever heard anybody say, just play normal? This isn't a big match. And so he had an eye of how, and this is the big contribution of the inner game, one of the big contributions, which is one of the first people to recognize that we all get in our own way. And that if you can reduce the self-interference, there's a lot of potential, there's a lot of talent and skill that is already there, that has been blocked, that will then now have the freedom to start coming out. And once that comes out, you get to see it and observe it. And then it becomes part of what you're doing. Like you see, you're, oh, wow, I'm hitting the best backhands I've ever hit. I guess I can do it. Or, wow, I used to miss every 3 or 4 shots and now I'm hitting 30, 40 balls in a row. I guess I'm not inconsistent. That starts to change the mindset and the identity of people when they start being normal and noticing that they're expressing themselves fully and performing well. And how that fits into the thing that you said, go for it, was, I don't know if you've heard of polyvagal theory. It's relatively new on the horizon, but it's been around for 25 years and it got its traction. Stephen Porges discovered it, got its traction in the trauma area. Physicians and people working with people who have suffered early development trauma and PTSD from, the wars and stuff, and abuse, mental, people who worked in that area, they saw the value of it, and it's just now starting to come out, and it turns what we used to know about our state of being and the optimal state for learning and performance, kind of turns it on its head, because the old version was we have a parasympathetic system, which is the rest and digest. And we have a sympathetic system, which was basically said to be the fight or flight system. And they were antagonistic. I used to speak about this all the time, and it's antagonistic. Turns out that's not the case. It's hierarchical per our brain regions. And so that you can actually be in your parasympathetic system and mobilize for action. And when you're in your parasympathetic system and mobilized for action, you end up with a state that allows for learning, exploration, discovery, flow states, which as soon as you hear that, that is real. You probably experienced it yourself. And this is the foundation for optimal learning and performance. And so it says that it's not antagonistic, that these two systems can actually work together. Well, for me, it gave me the plumbing for the inner game, for what I'd known and why the inner, what the inner game was, why it worked. And it was just like, wow, here's the plumbing, because, you know, relaxed focus is the number one, the mother skill of the inner game. And Tim mostly focuses on the focus part. But the relaxed part, which is relaxed in your body, that leads to the polyvagal theory. And if I, work with anybody, and it's the way I've been for the last 5 to 7 years, whether in sports or business, if I clearly see that they're tight, I'm going to help them learn how to experience what they're doing on a daily basis while relaxed. I'm going to help them get out of that chronic habit of being tight and stressed. You see this in tennis, the main easiest thing, especially with rec players, but I was a year ago at the WTA 500 in Stuttgart. I got to see very up close all they're tight. I mean, I saw more clearly than ever how all of them have the technical skills, and really what's going on are issues with the mental state, their mindset, and also their identity. It's really clear that, who they are on that court is getting in the way when they're playing somebody better than them.
In what you've just said, based on one opening question that I threw in a sort of second one, I had 10 different thoughts. And then I was thinking of which is the most valuable for me to share based on what you said, and happened last week, where I asked somebody, a group of, I went back into tennis momentarily, and I was running a clinic and these women had signed up for the clinic because they want to win more. And so my opening question was, well, how do we win? And each of them gave me a list of parameters of things that they need to win. And I simply said, stop focusing on winning. And I said, I basically met one girl every 10 years where I said, you had to step up and win for Australia today, and she could do it. That's one every 10 years. I know that to be factual. And I can tell you exactly who those players were. And they had some pretty extreme circumstances. So their ability to compartmentalize was potentially off the dial compared to everybody else. So thank you for sharing so many just nuggets, the fix-it culture, trust your training, just play normal. How do we tap into the relaxed part and bring together the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems to be able to trust was the word that I really like, to mobilize for action. So that is quite a disruptive idea. So I'm definitely going to check out the polyvagal. How do I say it?
Polyvagal theory, and it's poly meaning many, vagal referring to the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve has millions of strands, but two main branches. The ventral is the one that goes to the eyes and the heart and the lungs. That's why you can get headaches sometimes, because the vagus nerve gets really tight.
Yep.
Then when somebody gets butterflies in their stomach, that's the oldest system that we have. The dorsal vagal nerve feeds into the stomach area. And when the vagus nerve is tightened because it thinks that it's under threat, that's when we end up in the fight or flight system, and we can never ever learn or perform optimally from there. We have to get back to mind-body harmony.
Yep. But we spoke about the inner game of tennis quite a lot already, but I've never had the chance to meet Timothy Gallwey. How did you get started in the inner game? And tell us a little bit how you've been able to impact the concepts within the inner game. And for those who don't know the inner game, maybe you could just share a brief synopsis.
Sure. Yeah. The Inner Game of Tennis was written in 1974 by Timothy Gallwey. It's the #1 best-selling book of all time. Last year, it sold 45,000 copies. 50 years later. Lots of well-known sports people. Tom Brady, 6 years ago, when he came back in the Super Bowl, they were down 23 points. the next day, all on his own, he posted on his Instagram account, the reason I was able to stay calm, cool, and focused was because of my mental toughness, and I owe my mental toughness to the inner game of tennis.
Wow.
Sales shot up for 3 or 4 months. Pete Carroll is another one. Steve Kerr, who's the coach of the Golden State Warriors. I interviewed him a couple of years ago. He thinks also that the inner game was really influential in his playing career with the Chicago Bulls and other teams, but also especially as a coach. And then Bill Gates is put out a video about a year and a half ago about he thinks that the inner game of tennis is one of the top 5 books for improving your performance in any field. And highly recommends it. He says it's one of the few books I've read twice, and he's writing the foreword to the revised special anniversary edition this year. And how I met Tim is simple. Like I ended up in a slump. I was playing the men's open tournaments in LA after I got off the tour. I spent a couple of years winning most of them, and then ended up in a slump and started losing to people I had never lost to ever in my life. And my ego took such a hit, and I felt so bad and frustrated, and that I thought I gotta play out of this. I gotta figure this out. I entered a tournament in Northern Cal. I lived in Southern Cal. And I got the inner game and I read it and I won this tournament. And it was just like, I still remember how it just opened my mind to these different ideas that helped me to play more freely. And I beat some really good players up there. And so I wanted to meet him, and I tried everything I knew. I wrote the publisher, called I could not for the life of me figure out how to get a hold of him. And then I decided to stop trying. And this is one of my first experiences of understanding the difference between goal setting and having an intention. I kept the intention of meeting Gallwey, but I stopped trying because I didn't know what else to do. But I held the intention. 3 weeks later, I was at a computer conference in Las Vegas for my wife's company. And I ran into an old friend named Tony, who had been one of 4 guys to give me some money to go out on the tour. When I came back from the tour, I taught him. And then I started teaching him and his 2 daughters. And I invited him to this mental mind-body tennis seminar I was putting on, which happened to be at his club, which was an interesting coincidence. And after the seminar, he came up, we sat and talked, and he said, you're really into this. You might want to meet my cousin. So I'm going out on the tour, doesn't give me the book. I'm teaching him and his kids, doesn't mention it, Tim Gallwey ever. I don't even know how to explain that.
Wow.
All I ever come up with is Carl Jung's synchronicity, and that whole thing, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. I mean, it's just one of the crazier things that have happened in my life. And then we met and played some doubles and had dinner afterwards, and he offered to mentor me.
Yep.
And my training started kind of right there, because I said, oh, what are you doing Saturday? That's awesome. Thank you. What are you doing Saturday? Why? Why? Oh, well, I don't know how to teach the inner game way. There must be a manual. After all these years, can I get the manual and maybe we could go over it? He says, oh, no. That's not how the inner game works at all. You're going to learn the inner game, and not just the inner game. You're going to learn how to become the most effective coach you can be from your students in your own experience. You're going to coach them, and some things are going to work and some things aren't. And if you pay attention to both, you will learn from them what makes an effective coach. And so that's when I learned from my own experience how atrophied my own natural ability to learn had become, and how in a short period of time, when I re-engaged it, the learning was just astronomical, constant, alive, energetic, and I'm just going, this is the most amazing thing and this is coming after, before I got into tennis, I was miserable in business, miserable. So I'm experiencing this aliveness because I met Tim like 3 months after making the decision to get back into tennis. And so, yeah, and again, the most powerful inner skill that we have, and we all have it. It is the foundation for natural learning and for sustainable. And this is the other place where this is where Pete win forever. Sustainable high performance. And if you can, this is the other thing that you talk about. This is crazy. 50 years after the book, this is still an idea and a actual inner skill that is going to be disruptive in 2030.
Mm-hmm.
It's incredible to me that this is the most powerful resource that we all have, that if you re-engage it, learning happens effortlessly, easily, quickly, is enjoyable. And most coaches in sports and in business aren't using it.
Can I share two of my favorite parts of the book? That the opponent within one's head is more formidable than the one down the other side of the net. Number one. Number two, if a coach can help to remove or reduce the internal obstacles to their performance, an unexpected natural ability will flow forth without the need for much technical input from the coach. Example, bounce, hit. Two of my favorite parts of there.
Yeah, this is part of these are two of the best golden nuggets of the inner game. This is the part where he's one of the first. I can't say he's the first. I don't actually know, and somebody could, but he's one of the first people to say, it's not just the top 5, keys and the 4 pillars and there's this whole thing of, do you understand how people get in their own way, and can you help them reduce their interference? And if you do, then this natural thing does come out. Whatever is there will come out.
So if a business coach is listening to this episode, what if they're saying, okay, Sean and Emma, this is great conversation, but how does that relate to me in business?
Well, it can relate in a number of different ways. I mean, the last 10 years, almost every single senior executive I've coached is starting from a place of high stress and overwhelm and lack. These are things they've complained about: lack of work-life balance, their families giving them constant feedback that they're not there when they're there.
Yep.
And so this is where, I already know starting out, like if I can help them reduce the sense of stress, understand a few key factors of what is causing the internal state, how important the internal state is, start doing some things to reduce the stress and sense of overwhelm, and focus on 1 or 2 things that are critical that they've most likely been avoiding. So you can steal this if you want. I use what is the tennis ball? There are many, many examples of how the tennis ball is the most important thing. the receiving of it, the sending, the tennis, everything in tennis happens after we've perceived the tennis ball and read it. So I take them out on the court and I do some things with them about that, and they get it in their bodies. They understand these principles in their bodies, and then I take it and say, okay, so what's the tennis ball? What's the one thing that you could focus on? An example would be Dave & Buster's is a restaurant chain here in the States. And I worked with their leadership team for about 2 or 3 years. They started with 4 scorecards of 11 very important things on each scorecard for 44 very important things. And if people don't know, that's too many. The brain literally cannot handle that many. And then you add other things that would crop up that they were told that was important. So I got a group of leaders that I worked with, and we identified the one thing that they needed to focus on. So I helped work with them to get into a more relaxed state and focus on this one most important thing. And usually the change happens within 2 to 3 months. The first beginnings of the change will happen. And within 18 months, what's really awesome is that they're now performing without trying hard, without a lot of stress. So for instance, the Southern Cal leader had increases in about 30% in 18 months. And they were saying, we didn't think anybody could he was a rookie leader. Like, we didn't think anybody could get these results, let alone a rookie, and he's just smiling all the way because he said, I can't believe how easy it is. And that's the same. Roger Federer 7 years ago when he won the Australian Open, down 3-1 in the 5th. I interviewed him about 3 months after the event. I think it was his 18th Grand Slam, and he was down 3-1 in the 5th and came back, won 5 straight games. I said, so how'd you do it? He said, I just focused on the ball. I stopped worrying about everything. I just felt the privilege of being there, how exciting this was, and I just focused on the ball. That was it. Mm-hmm. And I entered into a flow state and everything became effortless, and I played the best of the whole,
Yep.
And so, and I'll stop there. You can tell I could just keep going. That's what
I know.
The problem is I love this stuff so much.
I know you do. It's so cool. I love talking to you about it as well. So I want to go to accelerated learning and innovative coaching. Talk to me about how learning has changed over the years, or has it? And that's part 1 of the question. Part 2 is around this, the concept of innovative coaching, because I still feel that the managers and the leaders who I'm working with are still old school, direct and tell, because they think that's faster to get the message across.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what are your thoughts on those 2 topics?
So I had a chuckle when you said, has learning changed? So let me just inquire in a little bit. So what do you mean by, where is that question coming from? Has learning changed? What do you?
Yeah, it comes back to the manual concept. There's the beginner, associative, and then autonomous, 3 different stages of learning that people go through. And, that over the years is a concept, A plus B plus C equals now you know how to learn something. Accelerated learning obviously can mean something different. And do you think that those stages still exist like a manual, or do you think there's ways to hack the?
So
stages of
Funny
learning?
enough, I'm not actually familiar. I've learned almost everything from my own experience, so I don't have a bunch of models. So I don't know. I'm not familiar with the model that you just said, although if we talked about it, I could go, oh, okay, I get. So learning is progressive,
Yep.
but it can happen a lot faster. How long do you think it should take to teach a beginner who's never ever played tennis before or any racket sports? How long should it take them to learn how to play tennis?
Well, I use foam balls in the service boxes, have them playing tennis by the end of the first lesson.
There you go. I can do it like you. I do the same type of thing by virtue of understanding, like, trying out different things and knowing how they get in their own way. And this is one of the things we filmed in Stuttgart last year, is working with a bunch of beginners, and it takes about 15 or 20 minutes to have them rallying with me, and they're not thinking about anything because I haven't given them anything to think about. And the reason I haven't given them anything to think about is the simple reason that I know from my own experience and others that if they're thinking too much about what they're doing, they're not going to be natural. I mean, it's that simple.
Yep.
And so, and yet we operate in this industry where the number one statement, umbrella statement globally is tennis is hard to learn.
Oh, I hate that line.
Let me ask, so do you think
Can't
tennis is hard to
stand that
learn?
line.
So that's when I say accelerated learning, it's all an illusion because it's only accelerated compared to the normal way people are learning.
Couldn't agree more. So, innovative coaching. Again, I mean, we're we're just rehashing what we've already spoke about.
Well, for the business coaches, I can give you something that might be a little nugget. I don't know. You can tell me, you can edit it out if it's not. Because one of the things I saw, because Whitmore and Gallwey had a little bit of a clash on a few items, so that I could hear both sides, and I got to so. And I've checked with people who are like members of the ICF and like senior leadership or whatever, and I think it's still kind of the problem. So in business coaching and life coaching, because coaching, see, in sports, coaching is coaching, it's teaching, it's mentoring, it's everything. The tennis coach does everything. But because coaching became defined in a certain way that you alluded to in the beginning, not directive and telling, but much more of an inquiry approach and asking questions and that type of thing. So what I found is from the very beginning, I could see that there was a confusion or lack of discernment between literally the industry called coaching, the role of the coach, and the skill that everyone defines as coaching. Because the role of a coach, you're going to tell people what to do. I am not going to work with a beginner. I'm not going to work with you. I'm not going to work with anybody in tennis, let's say, and reinvent the wheel on bounce hit and let them discover it. I'm going to tell them about the exercise. That is a direct telling approach. And in fact, I've actually, when I figured out how to get inner game into the development model, it now takes about 8 lessons. I can get just about anybody at any level to improve a full level in 8 lessons and sustain it. And I don't change their technique at all. Not one aspect is ever focused on technique. It's focused on having identified their state of being, working with that, and identifying, the ball, balanced footwork, solid contact, and having a clear intended target. And if you work with awareness, you help them become more aware of these and more focused, they learn how to be relaxed and focused. That helps them manage their state. But this is where the accelerated learning, if you focus on what's most important, the learning will accelerate. And if you focus on balance, and balance gets better and better and better and better and better, what happens to their technique, Emma?
Well, as we know, it naturally improves.
So you can just bring their awareness to their balance without telling them what to do. And as their balance through their proprioceptor, not, nodes throughout their body, they learn how to relearn, like learn from their own experience. And as their balance improves, movement dysfunctions start to correct themselves.
So what's the gold nugget for the business coach? Or did I miss that?
The differentiation between, because as in the role of a coach, you're not going to only be,
right, asking
indirect
questions
and ask questions. You're going, and all the best coaches that I know operate, and they can act as a mentor. Like,
yep.
You said, hey, I need some coaching. Some of what I might share with you, Emma, is like, well, I've been there. Like, I don't know if this applies or is relevant or not, but here's what I went through, and then find out, well, is that relevant for you? Why not? What's going on? It all can serve as getting more information and data, which the more that is brought up to the surface, the better that is.
So therefore, what is your definition of coaching then?
My definition of coaching is helping people improve their learning and performance in an enjoyable, meaningful way.
Yep. So therefore, between business coaching and sports coaching, do you see there's a difference? The way that you coach, do you approach it differently?
I have to be different because, generally speaking, if I'm coaching in sports, much of the time I'm in front of them. And so one of the first things I learned about like coaching is that, especially with inner game, is that if I have one student on the court, I can kind of work with them in a certain way with inner game. But as soon as two people are on the court, I have to now be different. I have to change because the dynamic is, I don't want the second person to be waiting around while I have this 5-minute conversation. So it's like, there's always these adaptations. 4 people, massively different. Group of 8, massively different. So the same is true for sports and business. In business, I'm rarely, now not the coaching workshops, I'm in front of them then usually, but if I'm coaching in, executive coaching one-on-one, it's usually like on a Zoom call, and that's different. But the elements are the same. There are certain fundamental, and this is what Joseph Campbell actually taught me, was that there's this layer, in mythology of the folk ideas, where all these myths look different. And the geography over there in China, it's different over there, but fundamentally underneath it all, there are these essential ideas that are universal because we're all human.
Yep. I really don't want to cut the episode, but I have to, based on how long people listen. So in 1 to a maximum of 3 words, what makes a great coach?
So there's 2 ways I could talk about this. First of all, I want to say I love the exercise just because it's a constraint. And so it really helped me like, wow, I like this. This is very cool.
Thank you.
On one side, it's what makes a great coach, meaning we know now that there are 3 things that make a great anything. Masterful coaching, deliberate practice, and you can call it commitment or grit or perseverance, but those 3 things. I don't think that's what you meant. I think what you mean is, okay, here's a coach sitting in front of, so I have to go with results. Like, I mean, it's kind of overlooked, but I mean, like, and if you gave me two words, consistent results. And so that would be one. It's pretty clear that caring. Many years ago, George Allen, Red Auerbach. George Allen was the coach of the Washington Redskins, Red Auerbach of the Celtics, and John Wooden and Tim were on a panel, and they were hashing out this thing. And it was it may be the very first, like, what do they call, pay-per-view, like, what can managers learn from these sports coaches? One of the first things. And they were like trying to like talking, and then finally Red Auerbach, has a cigar. He said, he grabs the microphone out of George Allen's hand and he says, "None of what we've said has made any sense at all. I have to tell you. I can tell you the one thing that's the most important. I love them." And he says, "I can tell you how I know that that's important, because they're calling me up. My players are calling me up years afterwards. They're telling me how they're doing. They're sharing about their life and their kids. I'm still in contact with the vast majority of my players." And so that actually hooks back into the polyvagal theory, that if you create an environment of care and belonging, that the people feel safe, that's the foundation where the parasympathetic kicks in. They learn how to be in that state. They mobilize for action from that place. And so that's number two. And number three, I would say, is presence, which gets completely overlooked. But the more present that the coach can be, really being present with the person, the individual, and noticing what's going on, the more effective they can be.
Well, it's been a pleasure being present with you, Sean.
Thanks, Emma. I really appreciate it. I enjoyed it.
Thank you for expanding my learning this morning and for sharing some valuable insights. Please, everybody, go out, get a copy of The Inner Game of Tennis if you haven't already. Reread it if you haven't. You've inspired us all to celebrate just the importance of the book and of the messages, more importantly, what's within the inner game that can help us all be better coaches, better leaders, and better managers. Thank you, everyone, for listening, and thank you, Sean, for being on the show.
The Coaching Podcast is sponsored by Transition Coach for Athletes, a global coaching, mentoring, and US college sporting scholarship placement service. The service helps athletes navigate the often challenging world of choosing your best college fit while maximizing sports performance. Visit www.transitioncoachforathletes.com. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a rating review on your podcast listening device. And don't forget to tell a fellow coach about the show. The ball is in your court to take action and enjoy your coaching.